Hello Year 10, it's Mrs Duncan here. So this week we're going to be learning about injuries in sport. So your learning objectives for this week are to describe how to minimise injury risk, to describe the types of injury that can be caused during physical activity in sport, and to explain how risks of injury can be reduced and how injuries can be caused. So the first thing I want you to do is think about your activities in GCSE PE and write a list of what common injuries could or have been caused when you've played that sport. So pause the video here and write a list. Right, so next to that list of injuries you've got, can you think of any way that these injuries could have been avoided? So again, pause the video and write down if there's any way that you think these injuries could have been avoided. So, reducing the risk of injury, there are 7 rules to reducing the risk of injury. So we've got completing a parkour prior to taking part in any physical activity, incorporating the principles of training into your training programme, adhering to the rules from your sport, using appropriate protective equipment, checking the equipment prior to use, checking the playing surface prior to commencing the activity, and completing a warm-up and a cool-down. So now, again, pause the video in a minute and think about in your sport, how do you reduce the risk of injury in your sport? So for example, is there any protective equipment that you wear in your sport to reduce the risk of injury? Go through the list and that we've got there and look at that and see what you put into place to reduce that risk of injury. Okay, so you need to know about certain injuries in sport. Now what you need to know is you need to define it, so you need to know what that injury is, and you need to think about how that injury could have occurred in your sport. So an example, so concussion, fractures, dislocation, sprain, torn cartilage, soft tissue injuries. So there's a number here. You need to know about strains, tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, and abrasions. So you need to know the definition, so what is it? And I want you to think about how this could have been caused. So in your sport, how this could have been caused. You might know somebody that's had one of these injuries. Yourself, you may have had one of these injuries. You need to know about the treatment for injuries. So you need to know about what we call RICE, so rest, ice, compression, elevation. So this week, your tasks, okay, is to use your knowledge of the different injuries in sport and complete the worksheet 3.13. So here, what you would have to do is match up the definitions with the injury. What I want you to think about is what we just talked about earlier, is what caused that injury. Okay, you then got to watch the clips on the Everlearner and complete the tests. And if you finish all of that, an extension is to create a poster on the different types of injuries which can occur, and can you think of examples of when these injuries may occur in your sport. Remember, this week we've got the 2 virtual lessons, okay, so it's at 2 o'clock on Friday and on Wednesday. So sign up for one of those, come with questions. It'd be really great to see a lot of you in those lessons so that we can help you with your work. Email your teachers if you're not sure about any of this week's work or previous work. If you need any help with the work, let us know how you're getting on.